All right, so everyone, good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. And thank you again for spending your time with us. Today, we are going to be touching on a topic that relates to understanding where our buyers are and where we need to be, because there's a big gap, right? So Melissa, Akisha, Alicia, Stefano, right? I just want to say welcome to each and every one of you all. Also, Akbar out there in Guyana, right? Welcome. So what's been happening, guys, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction to myself, a little broader introduction as to things that would have changed within the time that we would have spoken to each other last year to now. Right, so if you guys are not familiar with me, the name is Lyndon Bradford, right? And as I normally like to tell folks, sales for me has been my saving grace, right? Because of where I started in my career, I was actually looking for a job and sales was not on my agenda at all. And from there, it kind of evolved into where I am now as it relates to business development, understanding both sides and all, having a good appreciation of the deeper aspects of a customer's organization, industry, business model, etc. Right? So it's a number of things that I've had the ability to do, all from starting sales in 2003. Within that time, I would have worked with 17, so over a period of 17 years, 5 different industries and 10 major brands. Brands such as Chevrolet, Sharp, Samsung, you name it. The thing is, though, is that all of those industries have been very, very different with the exception of one thing in common, which is sales, right? So sales has been the common denominator throughout, and I've moved through different levels before I left Massey, Massey being the last organization that I was with in 2008. I was just preparing to move into the space of a business unit head in terms of managing one of the divisions within a Massey business unit. But I decided to leave to pursue this particular role that you guys are most familiar with me for. Why? Because I saw a gap that was happening with the 10 years that I was there. I actually saw a gap as it relates to how people are developing their businesses. And at this time, when I was looking at it, it was all along the lines of B2B, like how are organizations not actually filling some of the gaps. And I saw things from leadership issues, process issues, strategy issues, skill sets, and they are impacting organizations in a major way. But we also have instances where it doesn't seem as though many of us have a clear understanding as to what or how to go about fixing that. And that's kind of where the space that I have really been trying to play in within 2018 to now by doing a number of different things, all in the area of sales and business development, towards getting people to have a better appreciation as to their roles as salespeople and or marketers, how people should be going about business, better understanding their customers, and really changing the approach. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a lead in here to let you all know that I started sales in 2003. And the reason why this particular webinar is so important is because I need for people to understand, coming from where I came from, when I first started sales, to now, a lot has happened. However, I'm seeing a number of organizations not making a full change, whether you have a sales team or you don't have a sales team, whether you're marketing specific or not. A lot of things that's going to come up in this relates to where we're supposed to be. And the plus there is that with the exposure that I've had since I started between 2003 to now, it has given me the ability to help organizations bring a lot of things together, right? So on our agenda, we're going to be talking about the changes that's actually happening within sales, right? Defining the modern buyer, the new method of selling to your modern buyer, a little bit of a recap, and I'm going to go into some questions. But there's one plus or one benefit I wanted to bring to you all. And again, this is where the added value of everything that I try to do, I really try to add a little bit extra. So I do have a special guest, and he's going to come up a little bit later on. And he's going to kind of give his perspective as it relates to the topic that I'm speaking of today, all right? So guys, the conversation is how the modern buyer has changed the sales landscape. But we're going to start with a question. Do you agree, or has it been your observation that our businesses has changed or is changing over time? So in the comments, I want you to drop for me a yes or a no, or I don't really think so, I haven't really seen any changes so far. But put in the comments for me as to what have you seen to date? Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? All right, so we have a yes. Akisha is saying yes. Melissa is saying yes. Great. Here's another question. What has been the driving factor of that change? So we acknowledging that we've seen the change, but what has been the driving factor of that change? You can just type in, if you have something that's outside of this as an other factor, which is 4, fine. But is it politics? Is it customer? Is it COVID? All right. You share. I'll wait for you guys to put some information in there as to what has been the driver within that for that change. If we have Akbar on the call, Akbar, I want to see maybe type something in. Melissa, type something in. Akisha, type something in. Cover, customer buying process, the internet, all of the above. So Melissa is saying all of the above. Akbar is saying open markets, right? Akisha is saying advanced technology. And yes, well, we know COVID would have been a big contributor to that right now. Melissa is saying COVID-19. So let's take a look at a couple trends, right? Over the years, there have been many different bits of research, and I realize I didn't put the where I got this particular piece of research from, but this actually came from Forrester, all right? And Forrester, they are in the space of customer experience and customer journeys. And they've recognized that 67% of our buyers' journey starts online, all right? However, this is from my observations. So what I normally do is that when I'm engaging with customers, I do a survey, and then I take all of the information, or an assessment, I should say, and then I take all of that information and I compile it. And the number hasn't varied much since I started. So I'm still seeing just between the 60 to 65 range of our businesses or sales professionals or marketing. We are still using some very traditional approaches towards engaging with our customer. So I'm going to go back one. This is what Forrester says. 67% of the customer's journey starts online. And this is what I'm experiencing here between St. Lucia, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. All right, this is just the observation with the information that I'm getting back. Another thing is this. We still have companies that are relying on the brand name, which we know is important. So the whole name of the brand and everything else is strong, but we are still relying on our tenure, the brand, what we sell, the product, to be the driving factor for our revenues. Now, mind you, I am not saying that those things should not be. However, they're not really carrying the level of weight that they used to before. Because again, I'm going to be just double backing when we're talking about when I started to know. Back in the day, how I was sold, how I was taught to sell, I was taught to sell and market and everything else, to talk about the company and who we are and this and that. We've been in business for however long, and we expect the customer to understand reputation and all the other nice things, accolades that come with that, right? But that has changed over time. As a matter of fact, that doesn't really hold as much weight as it used to before. Those things are still good things to know. They normally come up in tender forms. Tell us about your customers. Let us know what's your financial background and how long have you been in business? How long have you been a partner? Have you been a good partner? Those things do come up. But generally, when it comes to going after business and growing business, it's not always the same approach, all right? Furthermore, I keep hearing this from time to time, right? So here's a director from a pharmaceutical organization who's saying, Lyndon, at this particular stage, where, and even though he doesn't believe as though he needs to be there, he's saying to me, I'm not sure my team really understands what our customers really want. In 2020, this was 2019, right? Speaking to him not too long after that, he said we've made some small increments based upon some of the advice and stuff I would have shared with him. But it's also something I've also heard from other folks in the tech space. Now, why would this be happening if it is that we have all of these accolades, right? So we are around for so long, and this was an organization that did have a strong industry name. If I were to call the name for you all, which I wouldn't, you all would say, yeah, I'm familiar with that company. But surprisingly enough, as much as we are familiar, he is saying, I still don't get the impression that we really know what our customers really want. So in general, in essence, guys, there's been a big gap, or there is a gap between the buyer and the seller. And that gap is affecting us in a number of ways. Let's talk a little bit about the impact of that gap. If it is, I would stay with where that the director for that pharmaceutical institution is. And I would also look at other assessments that I have done in the past. I'm going to use one example of an assessment to show you all what's happening. Assessment example number one. We have organizations every single year setting budgets, going after numbers, and they're not hitting the numbers. When I speak to sales teams, or if I speak to anyone at a senior level, even if you don't have a sales team, ask the question of what is your forecast, how far are you against budget, what is your frequency in terms of consistently hitting your number, it really varies. But then we come back talking about all of the different factors, and I would not use the word excuses, because if we are applying things like pestle here, then I could understand that you have a lot of external factors or there are factors that's affecting us. But for a while, to be honest with you guys, there are many areas that we have been falling short outside of the pestle and not taking advantage of. So this example here is an organization that would have answered a question where I would have asked, how often do you hit your sales target? And if you notice, only one person, that 8.3% represented one person that hits their target on a monthly basis. 50% of the team is doing it every other month. And then you have another 33% of the team is doing it every quarter. So from me just looking at this, I'm saying, so if you're not hitting target, what is the outcome of that for the organization? Because again, if we're not making budget, but I still have expenses, an organization has to make certain decisions. Here's another thing. When I ask which areas are you strong or weak in as it relates to your sales or your businesses, it varies. But it's the startling thing is that when I ask them which areas are they strong, notice that they would have said, and actually what I'm going to do is maybe take off the camera here, right? Right. So when I ask the question as to in which areas are you strong, the areas that involved proper engagement with the customer is where they're weakest. And this is a standard thing. And I'm just using one organization, but I can tell you all, it's standard in many areas. They're very good at communicating the value. But when we talk about what that value is, a lot of the times, that value really resonates about just telling people about the company, how long they're in business, and they could talk very well about the speeds and feeds. But when it comes down to really understanding the customer's needs, properly understanding it, that is a gap in terms of how we are trained or how we are taught to sell and engage the customers. When it comes to qualifying the customer to make sure that the customer is the right customer for us and our organization is not wasting time. I don't mean this in a bad way, but we're not wasting time and resources and money on a client that maybe isn't ready as yet to do business with us or to close or to commit. Then again, those are things that we have to look at as well. And then also closing, a lot of the times closing is a challenge because those first two things, which is qualifying and understanding customers' needs, is a shortcoming, right? So the reality is, yes, there are some changes as it relates to sales. And it's varying because the sales environment, guys, is changing in a number of different ways. As I said, when I started off in sales in 2003, it was very, very different. I started off in sales with a phone and a phone book and an empty desk. And that is that is my reality. I would listen, we would sit together as a team, and then we would cold call a large percentage of the time. But over the years, I've noticed certain things that's been happening. And the thing is that sales has been evolving, or business, or the approach to business and gaining customer trust and building on your portfolios has been changing considerably, but in a really, really beautiful way. So I may not use the word change, because sometimes a change might mean an immediate stop, but I see it as an evolving thing where other things are coming up, and it's allowing us to capitalize on those things. And there are two main driving factors. I'm only going to use two today, all right? And the two main driving factors is really our people and the internet. I'll say that again, our people and the internet. The power of our social and technological platforms. If we had to look pre, so this is where I'm making the comparison now between then and now, right? Our buyers really came to us. They had some information, but they didn't have a lot of the information. They came to us, and that is where we felt as though we were the head honchos, we were the subject matter experts, and that journey for the customer was one-dimensional, right? And in many instances now, when it is that we are trying to make a sales, sorry, back then when it was a matter of making a sales approach, that sales approach was really considered an interruption sometimes, because we have to call the customer and ask them for the time and this, that, and the third. I always tell salespeople that the first area of negotiation is to negotiate the customer's time to even listen to you on the phone to talk to them. But presently, because of the internet, the buyers are way more informed. I know that I can ask you guys, when you all are looking at, if you are looking at anything, to purchase anything, the first place you'll go to is to Google or Bing or Yahoo. So as buyers, and picture yourself as a buyer here, we are a lot more informed. The buyer's journey at the same time is a lot more fluid. It's not as random. So, well, I should say it has some random aspects to it, but of course, because of how they're actually going to be searching, for them, the buyer has a particular flow that unfortunately we are not immediately familiar with. So the sales playbook or the sales approach has to be evolving. I'll give you an example. This is a guy by the name of Gabriel Hughes. And Gabriel Hughes documented his approach to purchasing a car. The thing about his documentation, so these two slides that you're seeing, these two images that you're seeing here, where he was just actually documenting how he was using data to help him purchase a car, because he's a data scientist, right? But what came out, so when I was having a conversation with him, what came out of that was that he said, Lyndon, no one locally was able to give him the information he was looking for about the vehicle. No one. So we have someone who is in the market, right? But no, he's not going to call all of these people to say, well, I'm in the market, I'm in the market, I'm in the market. He's going through a particular process. And when he makes that decision based upon his process, is then when he will make the call. How are all of these other dealers identifying, how are all of these other dealers identifying when Gabriel will be ready? There's no way for them to do that. So how do we actually now work on fixing this? Well, one of the main things is really looking at all organizations need to kind of slow down a little bit, because we're setting, I'm more certain when we set budgets or we set the next year's objectives, it hardly incorporates the buyer. We always talk about what numbers we want to hit. We always go after, well, we want to do this year, and okay, well, we had COVID, so we may have a lesser number, but that number never included the buyer. It didn't, right? And I can say that again, Because when I was doing budgets at Massey, we didn't talk about the buyer. We didn't say, well, how are we going to spend some time, or what tools or strategies we're going to use to implement so that we can have a better appreciation as to the buyer. Everything was very focused on, this is what we're going after. These are the people who we need to call. So it was all external, outbound, focused. So with our buyers, we really need to pay attention as to who they are, what's important, how they go about making decisions, where are they in their journey. Coming out of COVID, one of my exercises all of January, I've been asking people and even showing some of my clients, how do we understand how COVID would have affected our customers' environments? As a question, that is something I've recommended everybody try to do for the month of January. If you didn't do it before, try to do it now, because I could be trying to sell something to a client or get a customer to take a solution, but really and truly what has happened in their environment last year, they're not even focusing on that. Again, this goes back to, are we doing the right things so that our resources are focused on the right people? Because it's also a little bit unfair, and I'm speaking from on the salesperson side now, that we don't take the time through our marketing efforts to understand our buyer, like a little focus group or a broad survey, but then we're asking the team to put a lot of energy, maybe behind people who are not ready. Or we don't even have that level of insight to the point so that we can now maybe make some adjustments to what we're offering. Because we may have a particular product, service, or solution that may not be applicable now, but we could maybe augment our services to support our customers. Now, I want to say this, that a lot of the things that I'm saying here, you guys may be familiar with already, but my biggest challenge with almost all engagements, webinars and otherwise, is that people don't always apply the things that they hear. They fall into a mood where they just pick up a routine and they just continue going with the routine. So my main takeaway for you all is, whatever you all pick up, even if you are familiar with it or not, apply the change, right? In terms of mapping your buyer's journey, we have to understand a couple of things. What does that journey look like? And this is an example. The journey in itself is one where we have to identify, well, what are the immediate needs of the customer, right? How is the customer going about that process of research? And then how is it that they want to be engaged with? And again, it's not always by picking up the phone. We have so many different forms of engagement, but sometimes here's what happens. Remember that initial slide where it says 67% of the customer's journey starts online? Well, then these first two represent where the customer starts. And if the customer is doing their research and they're shortlisting, let's say they start off with 10 vendors, and then they go down to 5 vendors, and then they go down to 2 vendors. Are you in that too? And how and what would have helped them eliminate those vendors? If we do not know that, guys, then we are unable to start positioning ourselves towards the buyer. And again, I want you all to pay attention as to how you make your purchases as individuals. When you all leave your respective institutions, at the end of the day, you're a consumer. And you're a modern consumer. So how are you now making decisions, large or small, towards doing certain things? And how can you now take that and replicate that back into your organization? All right? From there, once the customer is happy, then they ask for a commitment. Then they say sometimes, if it is that they're buying. But let's flip it. How do we understand who else is involved in helping the customer make that commitment? Who is influencing their buying decision? Because many customers don't make that decision by themselves. And then after you've done that now, the customer is then going to evaluate you. So was this as expected, or did it work as advertised? Are they receiving the type of results? I am very results oriented in every single thing that I do. Every engagement, I always like to ask the customer, what metrics do you want to measure this by? Because for me, it's important that I know that, because I believe in customer success. The other one is to have a blended approach, right? That incorporates both inbound and outbound. And I'll give you a little insight as to what inbound is if you're hearing it for the first time. Inbound is really now, outbound is everything where you pick up the phone, you're making a whole bunch of sales calls, right? While that is still relevant, we also need to have an approach where we are communicating with the customer in a particular way, and we'll see something coming up with it later on, where we are now attracting the customer to us, right? So what would a traditional sales approach look like? Well, it looks like this: prospect, close, go after the customer, close the customer. But it is not always that seamless. There are many different things because, again, the customer is going through a journey. What should that approach look like? Well, you now have to understand, by attracting the customer, you have to attract the customer to get their attention, and then move that to the point where, you know, your team or your marketing department or somebody, whether it's via via respective platforms, whether it's your website, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whether it could even be YouTube, right? How are you engaging with that customer to identify their needs? Oh, sorry, I see I have very seller-centric there again. That needs to be removed, right? How are you now identifying their needs so that you can work with them towards being committed, better committed? The interesting thing with this is now there is an alignment between the two, right? So between the buyer's journey and the selling process, or your sales process, it now incorporates another department that many organizations don't always create a sales alignment from, which is marketing. We have a bad gap when it comes to sales teams, marketing department, service teams. Service sometimes always fighting with sales for some reason, right? Sales don't always believe that they get enough from marketing. And then marketing sometimes would say that we do things and sales can't handle the job because we would bring leads in, but sales drops the ball, right? If I would have asked on a very high level, as to how is all of that tracked so that we can put some metrics on it, those things don't happen. Or there's no way, it's all, you didn't do this, they're not covering their end properly, and those things need to change, guys. But just pay attention to the slide here where we're talking about when the customer has a need, how is marketing communicating with the customer, right? To either identify what the need is or to let them know, if you have a need, we can support you on your need. If the customer is doing the research, how is marketing or even sales to tell the customer where to go to find the respective information that the customer needs? Because again, if I'm researching, I am not in decision-making mode as yet. Because we have customers where I may start off with the initial want. So I would want to make a purchase into something. But when I start doing my research and I start getting the information, I realize, you know what? And this from the customer's perspective, now is not the right time for me to get involved in this. And that has happened to many of us. So we would have postponed the purchases, right? But as an organization now, if a customer has done that, what is your strategy to stay in tune with the customer until they are ready? Because what normally happens is that the customer says, you know what, now is not a good time. And then we just leave everything behind and expect the customer, or we hoping that in somewhere down the future, the customer and I are going to reconnect again. But there has to be a process for that. And this, what you're seeing here, is an example as to how that process actually works, right? So it has to be, a blended approach as it relates to doing business. Here's something that we're also very traditional on. We're also very traditional on the way that we go about doing things in terms of, we tell the team, you know, we need to go out there and do marketing is traditional in the way that they market many times. Sales is traditional in the way that they go about doing sales. But there are 84 different ways of doing it. What you're seeing in red is the traditional ways, right? Between 1 to 5, magazines, radio, television, daily, local. Those things are expensive and you cannot measure your rate of return. You can't. I would love for somebody to tell me, what is your rate of return when you put a television ad or radio advertising there, you put some stuff in your magazine? What are they going to tell you? Yeah, well, you know, we had a lot of traction on that time, or it was seen by a number of people. How are you tracking what your return has been? With the involvement of the internet, look at what has happened. 31, 56, 76 to 84, 85 to 90. I actually added in the other stuff from 85 to 90. These things, guys, is the direction that we are supposed to be in. I'm not saying that we're not doing 52 anymore, which is making cold calls. I'm not saying don't go to trade shows. But there's a way now that you can incorporate all of these things. I'm not saying don't hire more salespeople at which is number 50 down to the bottom. However, how are you now incorporating what is happening now? How are we blending what's happening now and how our customers are taking that approach to buying into what is it that we are accustomed doing? And I'll be honest with you, there are some things that we need to drop because the money can be placed somewhere else. All right. Excuse me. The third thing I want to say that we need to be looking at doing is developing what we call, developing a tech stack, because we are also limited on technology. I'll give you all a little joke, right? So everyone would understand the terminology new normal. COVID came out, we had to change the way that we worked, and everyone was saying new normal, new normal, new normal. The thing is, as I said, I've been in sales for a little while, and I've been blessed to be involved in sales at different levels, but every organization that I've worked with has been international, right? Let's see, someone has a, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, excuse me, it's one person. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we will try to touch on them again. Yeah, we will touch on them at the end, right? So we had a lot of people talking about new normal this, new normal that. And as I was saying, I've been blessed to have the ability of working with a lot of international companies. So when I heard people talking about remote work, I smiled. When I heard people talking about the adoption of Zoom, I smiled. When I saw people doing things about webinar this, webinar that, webinar the third, I smiled, because those things are not new. They may be our new normal, but those things have existed for a while. The thing is that just like everything else, whether it's a Caribbean thing or it's just a Trinidad thing, we are slow adopters to a lot of things. We get really comfortable with where we are or the things that we're doing, even though we're not hitting our numbers. We get comfortable and we put a lot of effort sometimes in the same effort. So we put maybe more money, we hire more people, instead of us really saying, wait, hold up, let us take a step back and see exactly as to what we're doing, right or wrong, and make the respective adjustments, right? So when I talk about a tech stack, the tech stack that I'm talking about, there are a lot of things that are here you guys are familiar with. But when I talk about this tech stack is really, how is this tech stack involved throughout your customer journey and throughout your sales process? Because it's not just to say you have a website. It's not just to say, well, yeah, we're on social media, but how are you now using the platform in an quote unquote inbound methodology or a blended methodology where your sales team can use things that is being developed to help nurture the customer through the buying process, or your customer can find it on their own and then fall into your funnel. How are we doing that? Yes, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. So yes, everybody's email marketing. Yes, we're using social media, but are we now properly communicating that content? Because it now goes into content marketing. How are we now using content strategically to grow our business? And that in itself is a gap. And it's a big gap too. And it requires a bit of an understanding as to how to go about doing things like that. All right. The first thing I will say is to start with a CRM. And I don't think I would have mentioned this in the beginning, but one of my major moves at the beginning of my journey as an entrepreneur was to identify a provider that really helped companies and me understand my customers better. And with me identifying that, I went through two providers. The second provider, being HubSpot, is the one I decided, you know what, these guys really understand the philosophy. And it's funny enough because the philosophy that I've been developing for a little while kind of aligns itself with exactly with what HubSpot teaches. So, but I'm not just saying this because I'm a provider, but because it's one platform that I liked. Because I used a couple of them before, but I didn't like it that much. But it's one platform that falls into a philosophy strategically for a customer that I strongly recommend that people get. But nonetheless, invest in a CRM, because that CRM is going to help you understand or balance a lot of the things between your sales and marketing approaches. Here's where, guys, I want to say, excuse me, I want to encourage you all to look at something. So if you are asking, well, how do we even try to bring everything else together? This is where an introduction of taking an entire process, because when you look at everything, it could seem really convoluted. And over the last 2 years, I mean, with everything that I have learned, and I'm still continuously learning, giving that to a customer who has other goals and objectives could seem like, yo, Lyndon, I do not even have the time to absorb all of this, because it's information coming from different places that we're trying to take and put into our methodology. So what I was actually able to do, guys, is use over the time is develop a methodology called attract, engage, commit, measure. An attract, engage, commit, measure really is, whether it's your sales team or your marketing team, and the goal for me in any engagement is to bring the two together, is to get those two departments, and by extension the organization, to change their approach and adopt an inbound and outbound as a blended approach to business, but really and truly doing it in such a way where they start attracting the customer that they want to have, but by putting the right type of information out there. So when I talk about your tech stack has to start with, excuse me, a solid web platform. Then you're also looking at your social media presence. And you also want to now talk about your sales team, because if your sales team doesn't understand who do they best serve and what is that value proposition, then even when they do have those meetings with the customers, it's a gap. What if now with marketing? So a higher education institution once told me, so Lyndon, boy, we bringing in the leads now. But when the leads go to admin or when the leads go to sales, I don't know what happens with it after. I have actually seen that in my sales team long before, where a customer will call in. So let's consider that inbound. And the customer will say, well, you know what? I want to get XYZ, but we still lose the deal. And when I'm asking the guy, well, how come we lost the deal? Because there was a particular phase of qualification and identifying the customer's needs that we didn't do properly. And with that, you tend to lose. So marketing could be right. Yeah, we are doing our job. We are bringing in leads. But for some reason, when the leads hit sales, we have a low conversion rate. How are we now getting that team to now convert better, close better? So this is where the sales techniques. So the sales technique starts getting ramped up. And then at the tail end now, how are we measuring that success with our customers? And I'm just talking about, again, a customer testimony here. And how are we using that to now bring it all the way back? And I'm not just talking about, well, how was our engagement? And no, we want to know, have you been successful? The things that you said that you wanted to achieve, were they achievable? So by me taking the time to break this down, I've really been able to balance something between both teams that now looks like this. So it's a matrix that we actually use, that I share with clients, that I encourage clients to build out for themselves, where we then break out, starting off with the buyer's journey. Who are the buyers? Who are the people you need to reach out to? Are you industry focused? Do you want to focus on a specific industry? Good. Let's identify the industry. Then who are the people in that industry that you need to be reaching out to? Cool. Where do those people go and get their information? What's important to them? What's important to them right now? If you don't know those things, then how are we just trying to sell to the customer and hoping that they are in the market? We need to start doing these things now. And this goes from events all the way down to selling. If I have to sell somebody a small item from a retail standpoint, these are the things that I would recommend. Then let's take a look at the sales stage. How is your sales stage aligned to the customer's journey? This is an example here, right? And then also now let's map out which departments are supposed to be involved at this stage. Mind you, we can also put finance in there based upon the type of organization that you have, because sometimes finance department needs to help our customers better understand what the process is, or finance department needs to understand what our customers' process or needs are, so that we as an organization can make adjustments to our customers. And then now, what are the sales activities that you need to be doing in there? And this is how I decided to put the different things together, because it has to come down from the standpoint of value, 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 value. And then also down to the bottom, we identify which are some of maybe your best platforms that you need to be using. And I've heard people say, oh, no, we're not on Instagram. Excuse me. One of the things that I did not put inside here, one of the slides that I didn't include, was a slide as to how the decisions of our organization is changing based upon the generation that's in that organization that we're trying to do business with. Because I've had sales reps and I've had directors say to me, oh no, we have a really good relationship. But when I say, okay, well, show me your database for customers that you haven't done business with in the last 12 to 24 months, and we're looking at the database, and one of the first things that we're identifying is the person moved on or they retired, and there has been no, outreach to who this new person is. And a lot of the times, this new person is either a millennial, because that's where they are now. They're coming in at that level. They're coming in with their qualifications, and they go through a different process. Yeah. So where's that millennial, whoever it is that we're looking for? Where's that person looking for information, and are we showing up there? Now, does this work? Does any of what I'm telling you here make any sense? Well, I always believe that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. All right. And this is not a video that I have to run, but I'm going to give you an example, right? One of my most recent engagements was Tech, right? Most of you would be very familiar with who this organization is. And this is Genevieve Julian, who's become a pretty good, close friend of mine. But at the time when we spoke last year, the organization was going through a number of things. You guys know that they went through, they were hit first when it came to COVID. But prior to that, because we were speaking up until 2019, prior to that, we were having some discussions because they were not really hitting their numbers, right? They were not hitting their numbers. So we knew that we needed to put some things in place, right? And there was discussions, and then COVID came and accelerated the whole thing. Interestingly enough, guys, this organization was able to surpass their target, their September enrollment for 2020, mainly because they started to change their approach, similar to what I was sharing with you all here. One of the first things that they did, though, again, is one of my staples, because for me to be able to properly help you execute on a lot of these things, we need to be able to capture information properly. And one of their biggest problems is that they had a lot of things in Excel, and they had Excels being shared by other people. So when I asked, well, share with me a database, and you all would know this, your database is your most valuable resource. But the database had a lot of duplications. It was messy. And I was saying, but how do we even start with this? So that was exercise number one. But one of the first things that we did when we used the CRM, when we used HubSpot, we cleaned up all of that mess. So now everything is done from right within there. The communication, thankfully, at the same time, just around the 24th of June or July, they revamped their website. So by HubSpot sitting on the website, and we actually activated something on the website where they saw for themselves. I didn't have to tell them this. They saw for themselves where the customers were connecting with them from. Again, let's go back to the journey, right? The customers were connecting with them as soon as it decides to roll backwards. The customers were connecting with them from their website. So the customer was, too far back. All right, so the customer was connecting with them just at the contact phase. But here's the thing too, the customer came to them with two options. Because one of the things that we spoke about, this is where now the sales enablement or the teaching of the team as to how to engage better. Are there any other options that you're looking at? But you say it in such a way where you're not just trying to identify who your competitor is, but we want to be able to help the customer make the decision. And by saying that too, we also helped you, Tech, understand that their role in the organization was not just to sell programs, was not just to talk about your ADM, or not just to talk about your who you're accredited with, and the Anglo Ruskins and the whoever else that's out there that's where you're getting a certificate from, but really help this customer reposition their value proposition to their customer, their audience, and their customers. And that in itself, guys, was really, really important. By using the other platforms, there were a number of other things that they did. But we're on time, and I told you all, I have a guest that I want to bring to the table. And that guest has become a good friend of mine. His name is Stefano Gasbarino. And Stefano is one of my colleagues and a close associate, and he's from HubSpot. And the reason why I asked Stefano to be here is because, again, there is no way right now that we're getting this information. And I really wanted Stefano to share his insights as it relates to, and he supports folks in the Caribbean as to where the direction of sales is coming from. And just give some additional insight as to what customers can be doing. So Stefano, thank you for joining. And guys, feel free to ask Stefano your questions. I'll be taking questions after. Stefano, it's all yours, my friend.
Thank you, Lyndon. Hi, everyone. Here in snowy and chilly Boston. Like Lyndon mentioned, my name is Stefano. I work here at HubSpot. I've been HubSpot for 5 years, channel account manager, working with Lyndon directly as he is a partner of HubSpot, as well as other Caribbean agencies, as well as some agencies in Latin America. And I think what you mentioned is really important, and how that modern buyer has changed, right? Information right now is ready available, right? The job of sales is not information giving. It once was, but not anymore. And remember that most buyers have already completed more than, I'd say, half of that decision-making process, right? They have intent, they're interested. Your job in sales is to take them over that finish line, right? Leveraging yourself as an expert that will continue being an advisor in that post-sales process, as well as relationship building, like you mentioned, as well, is really important. I kind of want to divide into 3 stages, everything from pre to the post-sales process, right? You mentioned things like content marketing, you mentioned things on the marketing side, but what's really important is how we're able to understand that buyer better, right? How we're able to build those buyer personas, the ideal client. I hear a lot of companies today where they say, oh, we want to sell our product or service to everyone. When I hear that, it's really they're selling it to no one, right? So how we're able to kind of segment and kind of create a segmentation of knowing which stage of that buying process your prospect is in. Right? Are they in the investigation stage, or in that consideration stage, or in that decision stage? Using your example of, I forget that gentleman, when he was buying a car, right? I took 5 months to buy a car, right? And are you as a business, if you were selling a car, are you just focused on that 10% of people that are already ready to buy? Why aren't you nurturing those people that are still in that investigation stage? Because if you're not reaching out to them, then maybe they'll go to the competition. So on the marketing side, how are we able to create that database, right, of segmenting that database, of nurturing that database to really understand that buyer more? And then on the sales side, how are we able to create value through a more of a consulting sales process, right? Not very transactional. And then once you start closing that client, how are you able to kind of focus more on that attention or that services side of things? What's really important nowadays is that relationship building process, right? I know back in the day, they were more focused on just generating those one-off sales, but how are we able to kind of increase that retention, make sure that our clients are being converted to promoters, right? How are we able to build that proactive process to incentivize upsells or resells or cross sales, right? Increasing that lifetime value and decreasing that cost of acquisition. And then that final piece is that measuring piece, right? And I've mentioned to you this before, Lyndon, what we don't measure or track, we don't control. So what kind of adjustments or changes do we have to also do to make sure that our marketing, our sales, and our service divisions internally are all on that same page?
Yeah. So I want to open the floor up to questions to you guys. And Stefan, I can't agree with you more on it. As I said, it's been a number of things that I've seen within, and I always like to say that I come from a real old school time of sales, but what has helped me is that I've always been adaptive. Coming from the organizations that I've worked with all of them being international, I had no choice but to be adaptive. But the challenge here that I have seen is really along the lines as to how do we get organizations here to really pick up on that. And too many times I've seen that it's always when things are dire, like we really, listen, Linda, we really need to do this because we're running low on budget, and the fate of the organization is involved. This and sometimes I don't want to say that's too late, but the work that's involved for you to start seeing the level of return is, I mean, the time frame and everything else is not realistic, because it took us so long to adopt this standard way of going about doing things. To now make this change, it's going to take a little bit of time. I mean, we can accelerate a few things, but at the end of the day, there is some work involved that we need to have a realistic time frame.
Yeah, like you mentioned, and there's tons of free tools out there, right? There's HubSpot free CRM. There's other tons of free platforms out there. The idea here is how we're able to build that system of record, right? Build those processes, right? Say without building processes, there's no scalability, right? So how are you able to kind of build that process or build that base and that structure so all of our divisions internally can be on that same page and figuring out where our visitors, our leads, and our clients are coming from, and how we kind of build out that flow.
Okay. So I want to open it up to the audience. You guys have any questions either for me, Stefano? Do you have questions as to how do you see this being applied into your space, developing both an inbound and an outbound methodology to really go after your clientele? Questions, the floor is open. I know I promised you all 12:55, so we are 12:58. Feel free to type them in the chat. If you don't want to come on to the mic. All right. So I want to ask you guys, I want to say thanks again for your time. We're going to be wrapping it up here. And if you can just drop your responses, right? Was this valuable to you? Did it give you a different appreciation as to maybe some of the things that you need to be doing differently? Yes, no, maybe. Put it there in the chat for me, guys. Excuse me. Let us know as to if this made any sense to you at all. And what is it that you're going to be able to do towards moving your organization forward. All right, so we're 1 minute away from 1. Keisha is saying valuable info. All right, so we're just 1 minute away from 1 o'clock, guys. I want to say, Melissa is saying very valuable. I'm excited to share with the team, in particular the CRM. Great, Melissa. This would be extremely valuable for you guys if things would have changed or not changed from our last conversation. So yeah. All right, so thank you for your time. It is 1 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Stefano, thank you for being here. The rest of the OPAAT-SWY team, also thank you guys for being here and coordinating as well. You guys have a safe and enjoyable and productive Tuesday evening. All right, peace.
Everyone, bye.